Hey y'all, this is Kenny Groom from Beyond Normal Media, where every story is a journey. Today, we'll be diving into something that's really helped me grow as a storyteller and creator, but certainly not without some bumps and bruises along the way. And that topic is my newsletter journey. So, I want to start out by discussing, talking a little bit about why newsletters, what got me into launching a newsletter. I launched the first newsletter when we were just the Beyond Normal podcast. So this was about 3 to 4 years ago. I saw some other creators in the space really leaning into their newsletters and really putting their thoughts to paper. There was some excitement initially for me as I saw this as a much more like a much more like journalistic medium that I thought this would give me some credibility. But I quickly learned that a couple things, right? There were a couple misconceptions that I had. I approached newsletter writing the uh, from the lens of like writing a book report. Like, and so for those of us that have gone and completed grade school, we all remember having to, even some of us that may have done some college work, post grad work, especially the process of writing a paper, doing all sorts of research, and then having several pages, almost maybe in some cases having what felt like an entire book worth of information that we presented to the public. And so that was a misconception that I had because I think initially I was writing it in a format that was a little bit dated. And just with today's audience and the the mental capacity that people put forward when digesting newsletters, I certainly think that nobody is opening up a newsletter in excitement, waiting for a book report, right? And so that was one really big misconception when I started it. Really, probably about 3 to 4 years ago, I wrote a few issues is what I like to call them. Like I relate that to like comics. I read a lot of comics growing up, and so I label mine as issues. But I essentially wrote like maybe one or two, and it kind of fell off. This past year, the past 12 months, I really have revisited the medium itself, and I'm really excited about what we can make this into. And so with that, I want to quickly just touch on some of the lessons. Let's transition to the lessons learned, right? So I mentioned some of those misconceptions that I had, but there were several mistakes that I think I made initially, and it was the biggest mistake I made was limiting the scope of the newsletter to the podcast itself. And so it really forced me to, almost deliver the newsletter in like a bio, like a biography kind of format. Again, going back to that book report mentality that I came into this with. That was one big mistake I think I had. Just early on. The second one was, skipping consistency, right? And so I told myself I would try to come out with one every single month. And there's a couple keywords that you probably hear in there. Is the first thing being try, right? And so I would try to do something, obviously, priority shuffle. And so it would just never be the top priority in any given moment. But then the second thing in there was I said I would just come out with it, for the month. I didn't set a timeline, I didn't set a date. And so those were two things when I relaunched it this time that I wanted to make sure that I focused on a little bit more. And so this time around, from a consistency perspective, definitely sticking to writing it each and every month and kind of leading up to the our release date, making sure that I have enough meat on the bones, right? I've been thinking about certain topics, maybe not as formally and structured as possible, but I at least have some thoughts in my head where I could sit down and really craft a unique piece for in the newsletter format. And then the second thing there that I touched on was, instead of saying I'm just going to release it once a month, setting a date in place. And so for us, our newsletters come out on the 20th of every month. Don't ask me why I came up with the 20th. That is just the day that I picked. It sounded like a good day to release a newsletter. It's towards the end of the month. And so for me, that gave me some time to know, hey, I'm going to do some really cool things to start most months anyways. And so let me go touch grass, right? Do some activities, do some cool things, and then use the latter part of the month on the 20th to tell my listeners about the cool things we've been doing, the stuff that may be relevant to them, our audience for the Beyond Normal podcast as founders. And so I'm always looking to connect in different activities, different spaces, different communities, particular to that audience. And so I always know on the 20th of the month, I've done some really cool things and with some really cool people that I can tell our audience about. The last thing I'll throw in there is about measuring feedback. I think this one is a hard one to really say you should do it from day one. I I will say you should be getting feedback from your audience, from different writers, from your peers, again throughout the process. But measuring the feedback, seeing if folks are opening the email consistently, are folks unsubscribing. Those are going to be some things you want to look out for. I don't think early on when you're starting a newsletter though, they're as, the first few issues, they're as important because you're just trying to get in the mode of writing a newsletter, if I can say that. But again, that's just something you want to be mindful of. There is an art to when you should be caring about metrics. And most of the time, when it comes to creative things, different mediums, you probably shouldn't care at the beginning about measuring things and measuring clicks and things like that. But as you start to figure out your process, I definitely think it's important. I did notice, speaking on the feedback piece, when I originally launched the newsletter some years ago, and then I quit it. One of the things I did notice was there wasn't necessarily a connection with the audience. And so, again, that book report style kind of delivery, I really don't think it was resonating with folks. And it proved to be true, right? Because now we're in a world now where there's so much focus on short form content and things like that, that newsletters really now they are a form of short form content, because typically a newsletter is going to be, a read somebody can do 5-10 minutes or less, right? Even shorter than that at times. I've seen some really good newsletters in the current times where the shorter the better. And this leads me to, just my realization on short form, adding things like clips in, making it engaging for the current times. That's something that, it for somebody who isn't used to the format of newsletter writing, I would say, it is important to, just take note of that and, you know, see what you're doing on other platforms. We have a big focus on platforms like Instagram and YouTube Shorts and things like that. We can take some of what we're doing on those platforms and just put it into this format here. Mhm. Lastly, I want to touch on, or no, just one of the topics I wanted to discuss in this moment, right, is just advice for creators trying to, leverage this platform. Again, I want to reemphasize, being consistent, um, utilizing what you're already doing in terms of short form content, that you're, just the different ways you're putting content into the world, and realizing this is just another medium for you to get that out. You don't necessarily have to transition to a journalistic, ethos to write a newsletter. You can really make it your own. You and in that, when I say that, right, it just came to my mind, right? The importance of treating this newsletter like it's just a brand touch point. It's just another way that you're offering your brand, what you really focus on, your core to your audience. Some of your audience, they're readers, right? They want to read through something, and then that kind of gives them that food for thought. That's what this newsletter is. It's giving them that food for thought through a few words that you deliver on a consistent schedule. For me, and what our team does at Beyond Normal Media, we have a really big focus on our 1 hour content product right now, our solution that now plays into this. And so we sit with creators, creatives, business owners, right? And in that 1 hour content session, right? If they are having some thoughts that they're putting together, right? We're speaking through things. They do have the ability now to really figure out how a medium, a written form, a word form medium like newsletters really plays into what they're doing. So lastly, I just want to, this is my call to action at the end. If you've been, listening this entire time, I appreciate you. We will definitely be diving more into the newsletter space, or the newsletter kind of medium in general. If you're in the trenches trying to tell your story, your brand story, just know you're not alone. This is something for me, as coming from someone who has been focusing more on being an orator, saying things out loud, and really using that as my call to action for folks. This is a really cool space to be in for me. I've leveraged things like note taking, voice notes to kind of get some of my thoughts out before I transition them into the newsletter format. So there's all types of different ways, I think, right now that folks are trying to figure out, how to leverage a newsletter for maybe their creative capacity, or you're a business owner out there. There's different ways you can tap into this. If you don't mind, right, I got to put this in there. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, and we'll be building this out together. I'll be focusing more on my journey into newsletters. Again, I shared a little bit about some of the mistakes I made along the way. But I want to make sure that, I'm sharing this with the world, because I'm trying to build this in public, and see, what really resonates with those that are willing and spending the time with me to talk through these things, or even just listening to my recordings like this. If you do have the capacity, check out our 1 hour content service if you're ready to show up with ease for your audience. Again, our motto for this is: you spend 1 hour with me, you get a month or more of engaging content for your audience. Thank you for tuning in to this testimonial from me on my newsletter journey. Thank you.